I never expected divorce papers to make me feel victorious and terrified at the same time. People whispered, laughed, even cheered behind my back. He must have done something unforgivable, they said, but no one knew that the person crumbling beneath it all was the very man everyone called an alpha. Jackson Crane had the kind of presence that made people instinctively straighten their backs when he walked into a room. Broad shoulders, a jaw that could cut glass, and a voice deep enough to make even confident men falter. He commanded attention effortlessly, and I had loved him once, truly and blindly, thinking the fire in his eyes was a reflection of the same passion I carried for him. But marriage had been a battlefield. His dominance, once thrilling, became suffocating. His expectations weighed me down like armor I could never remove. And so, late one evening after another argument that left me shaking and exhausted, I finally signed the papers. The ink barely dry, the reality hit me like a cold wave. Freedom tasted bittersweet. I remember the exact moment I saw him after filing for divorce. He was sitting in our shared apartment, half-empty bottles of whiskey scattered across the kitchen counter, his normally immaculate hair messy, and his eyes, those piercing eyes that once made my knees weak, filled with something I hadn't seen before. Raw fear. Why? His voice was hoarse, almost childlike. Why would you do this? I swallowed, my own throat tight, but the sight of him so unguarded, so human, stirred something inside me. A part of me, still stubbornly in love, wanted to comfort him. But the stronger part, the part that had survived years of silent tears, kept me firm. I need to breathe, Jackson. I can't live under your shadow anymore. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. My shadow? You think I cast a shadow? You think I control everything? His hands shook as he gestured wildly, spilling a little whiskey onto the counter. I loved you. I still love you. The words, raw and jagged, cut through the tension in ways I didn't expect. I had imagined him angry, proud, maybe even indifferent, but not broken. Not this. And yet there it was. My alpha, stripped of all his armor, vulnerable and real. Flashbacks hit me in waves. Jackson and I meeting at a local bookstore, his hand brushing mine as we reached for the same edition of a classic novel. The first time he kissed me in the rain outside a coffee shop, his coat wrapped around me, warm and protective. Late nights lying on the couch, talking about nothing, everything, dreaming about a life we thought we could build together. We weren't perfect, never perfect, but those memories had been ours, sacred in their own way. And now they felt like both a comfort and a curse. Come on, Jace. Don't just stand there. His voice shook again, softer this time, pleading. He had called me Jace, friends, my colleagues. Barely anyone else did, but it felt intimate, personal, a remnant of the man I fell in love with. I took a tentative step forward, hands tucked in my pockets, unsure if I belonged here anymore. The apartment smelled like stale whiskey and the faint trace of his cologne, a scent I used to crave. My heart ached at the reminder that love could be both exquisite and devastating. You think this will fix anything? I asked finally. My voice, though calm, carried the weight of years of suppressed emotions. No. I don't know. He broke off, resting his forehead against the counter. I can't lose you like this. The desperation in his tone, the vulnerability I had never seen before, made something inside me shift. I had imagined revenge, cold satisfaction, even relief, but not compassion, not longing. And yet I felt it, a pang that twisted through my chest, reminding me that love doesn't disappear just because the structure around it has crumbled. We stayed like that for hours, not speaking much, just existing in the same space. The sun had long set, and the apartment was lit by the dim glow of the kitchen light, casting long shadows across the room. I realized then that life wasn't about dominance or submission, about who had the upper hand. It was about seeing someone fully, and still choosing to stay, or at least acknowledging the love that had once existed between us. Outside, the streets were quiet. Suburban America had its own rhythm, peaceful in its nightly lull. But inside, our small apartment was a storm of emotions. Jackson finally turned to face me, eyes glistening with unshed tears. His usual alpha composure was gone, replaced with something far more intimate, far more human. "I'm not okay, Jace," he whispered. "I've never been good at this, at letting go. But maybe I can learn. With you." Something in me softened, though I tried not to let it show. The thought of rebuilding, of navigating the delicate terrain of love and forgiveness, was terrifying. But seeing him like this, bare and honest, made me consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we didn't have to end our story with destruction. I nodded slightly, careful not to smile too brightly, afraid that hope might be too fragile to voice aloud. "We'll see," I said. Simple, cautious words, but enough to let him know that I wasn't closing the door entirely. Jackson reached out tentatively, brushing his hand against mine. The contact was electric, grounding, familiar. It reminded me of all the times we had laughed together, cried together, loved together. And even though the past couldn't be undone, perhaps the future could still hold something beautiful. We sat there, hands intertwined, silence stretching comfortably between us. The world outside remained unaware, the streets silent witnesses to a quiet reconciliation of hearts. It wasn't perfect, it would never be perfect, but it was real, and real was enough. As the night deepened, Jackson leaned his head on my shoulder. I felt the tension leave him in slow waves, and in that simple gesture, the power dynamic that had once defined us melted away. We were no longer alpha and submissive, conqueror and conquered. We were simply two men who had loved, lost, and perhaps were beginning to find each other again. The road ahead would be uncertain. There would be challenges and moments of doubt. But as I looked at him, so raw and vulnerable, I realized that the laughter of others, the judgment, the ridiculite didn't matter anymore. Love wasn't about appearances or power. It was about presence, about being there for someone when they were most broken, and about finding beauty in the cracks. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to hope. And perhaps, in that hope, Jackson and I could rediscover not just each other, but the quiet magic that had brought us together in the first place. The next morning, sunlight spilled lazily across the kitchen floor, catching the dust motes in a soft golden glow. Jackson was already awake, sitting at the small wooden table with a mug of coffee in hand, staring blankly at the cup as though it held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. "Morning," I said quietly, leaning against the doorway. He looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten I was there. "Morning," he replied, voice rough but calmer than the night before. "You slept well?" I shrugged, trying to hide the ripple of emotions that woke with me. "Enough to know I didn't dream of you yelling at me." Jackson chuckled, a low, shaky sound. "Yeah, me neither." He trailed off, sipping his coffee, and I realized he didn't need to finish. The memory of our confrontation lingered between us, heavy and unresolved. I sat across from him, careful not to invade the fragile space that had formed between us. Yet, every small glance, every brush of his fingers against the cup, carried an intimacy that had nothing to do with the past arguments and everything to do with the bond that neither time nor pain had truly severed. "Jackson," I started, hesitating. "About last night." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "I know. I was a mess. I shouldn't have. And yet you were honest." I interrupted, surprising even myself with the softness in my tone. "That's what matters. I don't want us to pretend anymore. I don't want us to hide behind masks or roles." He blinked at me, a mixture of surprise and relief crossing his face. For a moment, I wondered if he would laugh or scoff, as he usually did when emotions threatened to surface. But he didn't. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Okay," he said simply. "No masks. Just us." The words hung in the air like a fragile promise. I wanted to believe them, wanted to lean in and let all the barriers crumble. But caution held me back. An old habit, a protective instinct formed from years of surviving my own emotional storms. Days passed in a strange, delicate rhythm. We moved through the apartment almost as strangers, yet every shared space, every casual glance, carried the weight of history. Grocery trips were tense, Small talk awkward. But there were moments glimmers of what once was, when our hands would brush, or our eyes would meet over the kitchen counter, and the past seemed to whisper through the present. One evening, Jackson suggested we take a walk. The sun was setting over the quiet suburban streets, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The world felt expansive, yet intimate, as if it existed just for the two of us. "Do you remember the park near my old apartment?" Jackson asked, voice soft, almost hesitant. I smiled faintly, recalling the memory. "Yeah, the one with the fountain that scared every pigeon in the neighborhood." He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that eased some of the tension between us. "Exactly that one. I used to come here when I was stressed. The fountain, the trees. It helped me think." We walked side by side, shoulders brushing occasionally, sharing the silence that was no longer suffocating but comforting. The suburban houses, the neatly trimmed lawns, the distant hum of traffic all became part of a backdrop for a fragile reconnection. "Jace," Jackson said after a while, breaking the comfortable silence, "I've been thinking about us, about what happened. I know I was controlling, overbearing. I never meant to make you feel trapped." "I know," I replied, "and I've had to live with my own guilt too, letting it get to the point where divorce seemed like the only option. But maybe this is a chance to do it differently." His eyes softened, searching mine for reassurance, for permission. "Do you want that?" I hesitated. I wanted to protect myself, yet a part of me ached for the closeness we had lost. "I want to try, but we have to take it slow. No more pretending, no more expectations. Just us, figuring it out together." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Slow. Okay, I can do that." That night, we cooked dinner together, a chaotic symphony of chopping, spilling, and laughter. The small apartment smelled of garlic and spices, the kitchen light casting a soft glow over our faces. Jackson's hand brushed mine as we passed ingredients, and for the first time in months, I didn't recoil. We talked, really talked about fears, regrets, dreams we'd abandoned. The conversation flowed naturally, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes painfully, but always with honesty. And when the plates were finally set, we sat across from each other, hands occasionally touching over the table, eyes meeting with unspoken understanding. "Remember the first time we cooked together?" I asked, smiling at the memory. "How could I forget?" Jackson replied. "You nearly set the kitchen on fire." I laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "And you saved it heroically while critiquing my technique." He grinned, a little sheepishly. "Some things never change." In the following weeks, we navigated the delicate dance of rebuilding trust. Every step forward was tentative yet thrilling. We revisited old haunts, the bookstore where we met, the coffee shop where we shared our first rainy kiss, even the park with the frightened pigeons. Each place was a thread weaving us back together, binding our past with a cautious hope for the future. One rainy evening, we found ourselves at that park again, standing by the fountain, its water sparkling under the lamplight. The world around us blurred, leaving only the soft hum of falling rain and the shared warmth between us. Jackson reached for my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. "I've missed this," he whispered. "Missed you. I've missed you too," I admitted, feeling the tension that had held me back dissolve just slightly. "But this time, we do it differently, together. No games, no shadows." He nodded, his forehead resting against mine. "Together," he repeated, the word a promise, a vow, a lifeline. And in that moment, the past, the fights, the heartbreak, the humiliation of public scrutiny faded into the background. We were two men, standing close in the rain, vulnerable yet resilient, choosing to embrace the imperfect, messy beauty of love. Returning to the apartment, we found small joys in shared routines. Grocery shopping became a game of playful teasing, cooking a dance of accidental spills and laughter. Nights were spent curled up on the couch, talking, reading, sometimes just holding each other in comfortable silence. It wasn't perfect. Arguments flared occasionally, old habits died hard, and both of us had to remind ourselves to breathe, to pause, to forgive. But every challenge met was a small victorious step toward a love that was no longer about dominance or pride, but about partnership, trust, and mutual care. Jackson, once the untouchable alpha, now shared his fears openly, asking for reassurance and giving it in return. I, once wary and guarded, learned to trust the man before me, to see him not as a conqueror, but as a partner equal and committed. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sun dip behind the suburban skyline, Jackson leaned his head on my shoulder. "You know," he murmured, "I never realized how much I needed to fall apart to see what really matters." I smiled, tracing circles on his hand. "Sometimes it takes breaking down to build something stronger, something real." He looked up at me, eyes glistening in the twilight. "I don't want to lose you again. Not like that. Not ever." "You won't," I said firmly. "Not if we keep choosing each other, every day." And for the first time in a long while, both of us believed it. Not because love was easy, but because we had survived its hardest tests, emerged bruised but unbroken, and discovered that intimacy, trust, and tenderness could exist even after pain. The following weekend, we took a spontaneous trip to the countryside, leaving behind the familiar streets of suburban America for winding roads, open fields, and the quiet hum of nature. Driving side by side, music playing softly, the tension between us had melted into something light, playful, and deeply intimate. At a small lake, we stopped to watch the sunset, the water reflecting the sky in a tapestry of pink and orange. Jackson reached for my hand, our fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had never been apart. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think being an alpha meant never showing weakness, but now I know it means having the courage to be seen. Completely. And I've learned that love isn't about control," I replied, squeezing his hand. "It's about presence, care, and honesty." He smiled, leaning his forehead against mine. "Then maybe we've finally figured it out." The world around us faded, the lake, the fields, the sky, all secondary to the quiet connection we had rediscovered. The laughter, the whispered confessions, the small, gentle touches formed a mosaic of intimacy that no past betrayal could erase. The night fell, stars glittering in the clear sky, and we lay side by side on a blanket, sharing warmth and stories. Every laugh, every sigh, every gentle brush of fingertips against skin was a thread, weaving a tapestry of a love reborn. Jackson turned to me, eyes reflecting the starlight, and whispered, "I don't care what anyone else thinks. I just want you, Jace. All of you, all the time." "And you have me?" I replied, pressing a soft kiss to his temple. "All of me, all the time." For the first time in what felt like forever, there were no masks, no expectations, no shadows. Just two men, two hearts, and the promise that love, true, honest, imperfect love, was worth everything. The morning after our trip to the countryside felt like a dream. We drove back to the city in silence, content in each other's presence, the windows down and the wind tugging at our hair, carrying away remnants of the tension that had plagued us for months. Jackson glanced at me occasionally, a small, soft smile playing at the corners of his lips, and I returned it, feeling a warmth I hadn't thought possible since we'd signed the divorce papers. Back in our apartment, life resumed its ordinary rhythm, but with a difference. Ordinary had become extraordinary because we moved through it together, side by side. Breakfasts were shared, dishes washed with teasing laughter, and casual touches became declarations of care. Even mundane errands carried the thrill of companionship. One afternoon, I found Jackson in the living room, sprawled across the couch with his laptop open, typing furiously. "What are you doing?" I asked, tilting my head as I leaned against the doorway. "Writing," he muttered without looking up. I want to document us, everything, our story, our mistakes, our triumphs, so we never forget how far we've come." I walked over and sat beside him, reading over his shoulder. His words were raw, honest, and deeply intimate. Each sentence laid bare the layers he had hidden behind alpha pride and bravado, revealing a man who had loved fiercely, faltered painfully, and learned to love better. "You're amazing," I said softly, running a hand over his arm. "And I'm proud of you for us." He paused, looking at me with eyes that held both vulnerability and unspoken gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you. You made me see myself, Jace. You made me brave enough to face everything I was too scared to admit." I felt my chest tighten with emotion. "And you helped me see that love isn't about control or fear. It's about trust, patience, and showing up even when it's hard." Weeks turned into months, and our bond only deepened. Every evening spent together, every whispered conversation in the quiet of our apartment, every accidental brush of fingers against skin became a thread, weaving a tapestry of intimacy and trust. The alpha facade Jackson had worn for so long no longer needed to exist. He was simply himself, and I loved him more for it. We began attending social events together, not out of obligation, but as a united pair. Friends who had once whispered about our divorce looked on in surprise as we entered side by side, comfortable, radiant, and undeniably connected. There was no arrogance, no alpha dominance, only a quiet confidence born from understanding and mutual respect. One night, after a dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown, Jackson held my hand across the table, fingers intertwined. "Do you remember how terrified I was when you filed those papers?" he asked, voice low and almost hesitant. I laughed softly, the memory vivid. "I remember thinking you'd explode or break something expensive. But you surprised me." "I did, didn't I?" His smile was sheepish yet tender. "I broke down. Couldn't believe I was losing you. And I realized something important. I didn't want to lose you, not ever." I squeezed his hand, feeling the weight and sincerity of his words. "And you won't. Not if we keep choosing each other, every day." He leaned closer, brushing his lips lightly against mine. A kiss that carried every ounce of longing, regret, and hope that had accumulated over months of tension. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a reaffirmation of love that had survived fire and heartbreak. Our love grew in quiet, steady ways. We began sharing more of our lives with each other, hopes, fears, ambitions, and secrets we had previously guarded. Every morning, we woke up in each other's arms, a ritual of intimacy and reassurance. Every evening, we recounted the day's small victories and failures, finding comfort in shared presence. Jackson, once an untouchable alpha, now reveled in the soft power of vulnerability. He learned to ask for help, to lean on me, and to trust that love was not about dominance but partnership. I, in turn, learned that opening my heart fully did not make me weak, it made me whole. One rainy evening, as the city lights reflected on wet streets outside our apartment, Jackson and I sat curled on the couch under a shared blanket. The sound of raindrops tapping against the window was a quiet rhythm to our conversation, punctuated by laughter, sighs, and the occasional comfortable silence. "I used to think I had to be strong all the time," he admitted, resting his head on my shoulder. "But strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing up, together, even when the world is against you." I stroked his hair gently. "And I'll always stand with you, no matter what." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally, and we stayed like that for hours, hearts beating in sync, sharing warmth and quiet understanding. The turning point came one sunny afternoon, months after our reconciliation began. We were walking through a local farmer's market, the air filled with the sense of fresh bread and blooming flowers. Jackson paused, pulling me gently behind a stand of sunflowers. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. I tilted my head, curiosity and apprehension mingling in equal measure. He pulled out a small, carefully wrapped box. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, revealing a delicate silver ring, simple, elegant, and perfectly understated. "Jace," he said, voice steady despite the nervous tremor I could detect. "I don't want to just live in the past or dwell on mistakes. I want to build a future with you, a future where we choose each other every single day. Will you marry me again?" Tears welled in my eyes, and laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep in my chest. Jackson. Yes, of course I will. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and in that instant, the past, the divorce papers, the fights, the heartbreak all became part of a story that led us here. Not as victims, but as survivors, as lovers, as partners reborn. We embraced in the middle of the bustling market, oblivious to the stares, the whispers, the world outside. In that hug, we sealed our commitment not just with words or rings, but with the raw, unwavering truth of our hearts. Weeks later, we held a small ceremony with close friends and family, celebrating our love quietly but joyfully. No grand gestures, no elaborate decor, just warmth, laughter, and the quiet understanding that love had endured trials and emerged stronger. Jackson's eyes never left mine, and I could see in them the same mixture of awe, tenderness, and gratitude that had first drawn me to him. When it came time to exchange vows, Jackson took my hands in his voice soft but unwavering. Jace, I promise to love you with honesty, patience, and humility. I promise to stand with you through every storm, to celebrate every joy, and to always see you for who you are, not just my alpha, but my equal, my partner, my home. I felt tears slip down my cheeks as I repeated my own vows, promising the same, knowing that we had both learned the hard lessons of love, loss, and redemption. After the ceremony, we slipped away from the crowd, walking hand in hand along a quiet street bathed in the glow of the evening sun. The city seemed to breathe around us, the mundane transformed into something sacred by the intimacy we carried with us. Jackson leaned his head against my shoulder, whispering, "I've never been happier." "Me neither," I replied, squeezing his hand. "We fought, we fell, we broke, but we found each other again. And that's everything." He smiled, brushing his lips against my temple. Everything indeed. The world beyond us, the judgment, the whispers, the laughter of strangers no longer mattered. We had each other. We had honesty, trust, and a love that had survived every test. And that was enough. As the sun set, painting the sky in a kaleidoscope of colors, we walked together, hearts aligned, hands entwined, stepping into a future that we chose to create together, forever and without fear. And in that quiet, perfect moment, the past, with all its chaos and heartbreak, finally settled into a story of redemption, intimacy, and enduring love. Jackson, my once unyielding alpha, and I, Jace, the one who had once walked away, had both discovered that true strength lay not in dominance or pride, but in love, vulnerability, and the courage to choose each other every day. We laughed, we whispered, we kissed under the fading light of an American suburb that had witnessed our pain and our triumph. And as we held each other close, the world around us faded entirely, leaving only the certainty that love, when honest and unwavering, could heal, transform, and endure forever. The divorce that everyone had laughed at had become the catalyst for something infinitely more profound. A love rebuilt, a partnership renewed, and a life shared with authenticity and devotion. Jackson and I were no longer defined by titles, roles, or expectations. We were defined by each other, and by the deep, abiding joy of finally being home in one another's hearts. The future stretched ahead, wide and luminous, a canvas we would paint together, hand in hand, heart in heart. And in that shared space, I knew with certainty that no one could ever break us again. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.